Welcome to this real-world project management webinar, Strategizing for Success, 3 key visualization tools to use before project kickoff. I am Lauren Humphrey and I am part of the membership team at APM. Today's webinar will be moderated by Sebastian Woodruff, Marketing Manager at Mind Manager. A few housekeeping rules before we get started. Attendees are on mute. This is to avoid disruption. There will be, of course, an opportunity to ask questions during the Q&A session, so please do leave these via the question panel for our experts to address at the end. The webinar will run for 60 minutes, consisting of knowledge share and Q&A. The webinar will be recorded and will become a resource on the membership section of the website. So without further ado, I'm pleased to hand over to Sebastian for the formal introductions.
Thanks, Lauren, and hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. As Lauren said, my name is Sebastian Woodruff. I'm from Mind Manager Software, and we're really pleased to be here today with the Association for Project Management. The session that we're about to present to you today, Strategizing for Success, is all about why and how to use visualization in the project management process, especially in the early phases of a project when a holistic view is needed to have a clear and upfront understanding of risks, requirements, and responsibilities. For this session, we have asked Mr. Nick Duffel to join us. Nick is a longtime partner with Mind Manager, and he also has his own consultancy, Harpod Consulting. He's an expert in visual thinking and design, and I think it's fair to say that Nick is a bit of an authority on mind mapping and visualization. So I think that there couldn't be a better person to present this subject today to you than Nick. His presentation will last approximately 30 minutes, and as Lauren said, at the end of the session, we will save some time for Q&A, so if you've got any questions, just pop them in to the questions section of the control panel, and I will pose them to Nick at the end of the session. And yeah, if the materials and the models that Nick will present today will be made available to you, so if you are interested in them, we can share those with you. But without further ado, I'll hand over to Nick for his presentation.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. Thank you, Lauren, for the intros, and again, a very generous introduction from Mind Manager. Thank you for that. I don't know if I'm an authority on anything really, but we'll see how we go on today. One of the words you used at the intro there, Sebastian, was model, and modeling is really what we're talking about here. We're talking about using visualization to model things that are difficult to understand, difficult to communicate. Sometimes you don't really understand them until they bite you in the leg, especially around projects. So what we're going to do is do a presentation, a little bit unusually. We're not presenting from PowerPoint. We haven't got slides. We're presenting straight out of the software tool. I'm sure some of you will have heard of or seen Mind Manager before. For others who haven't seen this software before, we could summarize it by saying it's a visual. It's a tool for drawing pictures, first of all, but it understands a lot more than a graphics tool would. It understands the structure of the information that you're drawing. It understands relationships. It allows you to cope with large amounts of detail. It allows you to do manipulation, calculation, animation, highlighting and marking up things. It's really a very powerful workspace that you can put all kinds of structured and unstructured information into to keep track of what you're doing, when it's happening, how it's going, what all the information related to it is. And Mind Manager is it started as a mind mapping product. That was 20 or more years ago, more than 20 years ago now. And it's really developed into a dashboard, an information dashboard. So it's moved on an awful lot more. And we could talk about what's happening in mind mapping software, but really we want to talk about projects and project visualization today. So I'm relying on Sebastian to tell me if we can't see any of these topics here. We'll start just with establishing a reference point for project management. Every project management presentation starts with what the problems are, and as you might expect, the problems are always answered by whatever it is that the people are presenting. Now, what we're doing here is, although we're using a software product, these principles apply to anything. So you might take away some of these ideas and use them in other ways. You know, it isn't a product demo. We're not only focusing on a piece of software here. The ideas are the same everywhere. Information deluge is huge, and it keeps on getting bigger and bigger every year. You could regard yourself as working in almost an infinite information space, and there's less and less time to digest and apply it. And as we've all seen this year, communication is even more critical than it ever was. It always was critical, but communication has had extra barriers put in the way this year. A lot of people are working remotely. It reduces the chances you might have to discover something just by talking to people or cross-checking things, and it increases the reliance on systems and tools. And we hope that they just work, that if you post somebody a task, that they're going to do it. That's the idea. But there's 1,000 different ways that can come apart. So those are a couple of the ongoing issues for project managers. Now, then in the next section, I want to try and explain what we see as the difference between complicated and complex, because they're important. There's an important distinction here. We use the word complicated when we're talking about things with a lot of detail. So large volumes of information. It may be fairly well structured, may be fairly well defined. You can solve that by being organized. You can solve that with project management tools, with spreadsheets, with charts. There's lots of different ways that you can keep track of what's happening there. And complicated is just a question of scale. Complex is a different beast. Complex situation is something with lots of interdependencies, and you can't just fix one thing, because when you make one change, something else changes. So they're systems that can't be solved. And really, under complex, we're talking about Peter Senge's systems thinking, where you really need to manage those situations. You can't solve them with technology. Now, you could say that a lot of the technology that's been thrown at project management over the last, 40 years or more, has addressed complicated stuff. It's addressed the issues of keeping track of lots of detail. There's less of it that really helps to address complex situations. But project management is intrinsically complex. It intrinsically changes every time you look at it. It changes when you measure it. It changes day to day. Things happen that you don't expect. So a project manager needs to master both the big picture, the complex picture, and the detail, the complicated detail. You have to have a plan. Plan is necessary, but it's not enough. And planning is more important than plans. But you have to be ready for inevitable change. You could spend a week just reading through stories of projects that went wrong and why they went wrong. Now, the analyses and retrospective analyses of projects are not necessarily accurate. They're always with the benefit of hindsight. But what they perhaps suggest is the lack of preparation for inevitable catastrophe and changes in a project. Let's have a look over this side of the map. If I just move it across here. Here we've drawn a picture of, just to suggest how many different aspects of projects are interrelated, and any of these things can change, and if they change, they affect other things. And what we're doing with Mind Manager, with the Mind Manager software, is on the left-hand side of the diagrams we draw a bigger picture to show relationships, to show strategies, to show systems. It helps people to orient. And on the right-hand side, we're using the tree structure of mind mapping software, which is just one way to visualize, but we're using that to organize and navigate and drill down into large amounts of detail. And what Mind Manager can do that really very few other software applications can do is deal with both of these concepts at the same time in the same picture. So you can draw a picture on the left, which is a block diagram or a network, and you can expand the detail and do all your calculations and hierarchical adding up and marking and triggers and everything else on the right-hand side, where you're managing complicated stuff. So we can draw pictures of situations where we're dealing with the system side on one side of the picture and the complicated detail on the right-hand side. So you'll see some examples of that as we go through this. So how does visualization actually help to do this? If we talk about strategies for projects as opposed to project planning and scheduling, we could look at Kaplan-Norton strategy maps, which is a great resource. The word map doesn't necessarily relate to mind maps or mind management maps that we're talking about here, but really the same principles apply to projects, that they say you must communicate a strategy to succeed, and a project manager must communicate the project strategy to succeed, because people will take better decisions when you're not there to take them for them, when they understand why what they do matters. They need to understand how they fit into that. Now, visualization gives us a much wider vocabulary than words and numbers. We can communicate ideas much more easily. You can see the patterns, and by see I literally mean you can look at something and say, we're missing an element here, we haven't thought about that. It also, visualization helps to take away difficult issues from people. You can depersonalize them. And there's nothing better than collaboratively working and talking about a complicated situation in a dialogue and agreeing on how you think it works, how you think the model fits. That's really this interactive dialogue, and the development of these pictures is where a lot of the value comes from. It makes it really difficult to hide behind happy talk. And I've got nothing against marketing folk, but you can really show the guts of the assumptions and contexts in a picture much more readily than you can by having blocks of text. Clear thinking is basis of communication. If you don't understand something, then you're never going to be able to explain it to someone. But if you try to explain it, it will help your understanding, and the process of visualization is where the value comes from. A bit like planning is much more important than plans. The process of drawing pictures is much more important than the picture that you create. So we mentioned a little bit about what Mind Manager is that we're using here. It's able to combine and interconnect lots of different types of diagram, lots of different architectures in the same canvas, connected together, linked together within the same picture. It lets you mix structured and unstructured data. Don't know where that unstructured came from, unstructured data, and keep it in context. And then you can switch between formats. So you can convert one format into a different one. And you can also define custom data and perform calculations and analyses that way. So let's have a look at the three visual tools that the webinar is about. Really, we're looking at I've picked three of these. Tree diagrams, which is a breakdown in the hierarchy. Network diagrams, which are pictures of how systems work, how they interact with each other. And then tables and grids. And all of these things have a place in helping to master a complicated and a complex situation. To start with tree diagrams, this is a well-established use of mind mapping software. Mind mapping software has been supporting project management for at least 15 years or more. And a work breakdown structure can be beautifully drawn in a tree. And if you can draw your trees as organization charts, as we have here, then you can very easily model a work breakdown structure. So what we've got here is a mind manager map. It's got a number of topics which represent the phases of your project, and then each phase breaks down into deliverables. So you have project deliverables, and we can add notes about that. We can add links, we can add lots of related information about it. But what you can see visually is how the project breaks down, and then a deliverable breaks down into work packages, and work packages break down into actions. So we've got a very quick way of drawing a tool that a lot of people understand, the work breakdown structure. This is not the only way to organize projects, of course, but this is a great way to keep track of the detail and to be able to navigate that. We have a look at an example of that. This is an example project where we've actually broken down the development of an LED torch, the prototype for that, into all the things that might need to think about making the design, sourcing the components, making a prototype, moving on to production and marketing. So in the one map, you could have a whole project right the way across all departments. You could keep track of what's happening there. You could gather information. And this is a live thing. It doesn't have to be a project plan that is published as a project plan and is fixed. This map can contain ideas, things you haven't thought about yet, things you haven't done anything about, issues coming up, lots and lots of other aspects. But what we can do is, if we break down at the bottom of our work breakdown structure, if we moved into tasks and show the connections between tasks, so these dotted lines show dependencies between tasks. They say what order we can do things in. If I open the task tab here and convert this into a Gantt chart, then with a couple of clicks, we've made a Gantt chart out of the project that's been extracted from the map. Now, what's important here is that the Gantt chart just models the stuff that has been marked as tasks. So we can have lots of other information in here. You can have a whole ecosystem of other project-related information like risks and background information. But the Gantt chart only picks out things that you've said, this is a task and we're going to do it. So you can extract a project plan as a Gantt chart out of a project map that contains much more information on that. So that's a little look at using tree diagrams, and it's only one way to use tree diagrams. Which looked at what the work breakdown structure is. And you can create a schedule, and you can also use the same tree structure to perform cost analysis, risk analyses, other breakdowns. You can add formulas to do calculations to turn this into a dashboard for you. So there's a lot more that you can do, particularly with the tree structure, because the software understands the nature of the hierarchy. So we could add risks to each of those parts of the WBS. We could do analysis on risks. We can have a little risk dashboard on our project as well. So that's one application of tree diagrams. Now, to contrast against that, we can also draw network diagrams. This is not a hierarchy. This is an interactive diagram that shows the relationships between different aspects of a project. And what I've done here is take the probably well-used little project management triangle and turned it into a diagram in Mind Manager. But the purpose of doing that is not so we can have a little triangle that everybody says, yeah, I've seen that a million times. We've actually got a model here that works. And the way we've drawn it is our project is constrained by cost, by scope, by time constraints. Things can be above or below budget. So if the budget gets too high, then it changes color to indicate you've got a problem here. If we're not delivering enough, if the scope gets too low, then again we're out of range. And if it gets too late, similarly, we see that it's just a visual animation really, but you could use this to help explain to people the impact of the change they're proposing to your project, because you're working within constraints. You've sold an insurance policy to your client effectively. You've insured them against failing to get what they want, and you've sold that at a fixed price. The delivery price could be very, very different, and it could even be off the rails before you actually get to work on it, before you get to handle it. But what you can do with this diagram is explain to your stakeholders and to other parties who don't understand why their simple change is having such a big impact on the project. You can show them how any change that you make in a project affects everything else. It has positive and negative impact. Now, this system, from a systems engineering point of view, is inherently unstable. There's no self-correction built into this little triangle, this project management model. It's unstable. So any change that you make doesn't correct itself. It probably makes things worse, and every project manager will understand that. The reason we live with an unstable system is that an unstable system that is well managed performs better than a stable one. You could make it stable by adding huge amounts of process and procedure to it, but the cost of that will go off the scale. But a fast-moving, unstable system will perform better if it's properly managed than a very large, stable, slow-moving one. So this is the kind of diagram that we could put on the left-hand side of our Mind Manager map. On the right-hand side, we could break down all the detail of what this is. So if you want a reference, if you want to export this summary to a Word document, you could do that from Mind Manager. And you can also use a picture, an animated picture on the left, to explain to stakeholders to show your project management model. So that was an influence diagram. You could use that as a dashboard for constraints and requirements. So you could, if you wanted to, develop that particular map to be your repository of project constraints and refer back to that and keep track of whether you're above or below the lines and communicate that with people. So that's using it to draw network diagrams. And the third option we have here are tables and grids, and we've got a couple to show you here. One is risk management. Here in Mind Manager, we've drawn a grid, and in that grid, this is labeled up as a fairly standard risk matrix. So we have likelihood along the columns, and we have impact on the rows. And you often see these red, amber, green grids. Sometimes they vary about what people consider to be green and what they consider to be critical. And sometimes they vary on the number of different levels of impact and of likelihood. So we've got a 4x4 here. You can see 3x4s and 3x3s fairly commonly. And in these cells, we put a risk item, an item that we consider to be a risk to whatever it is we're dealing with, or risk to projects in this case. And this is a very quick way to graphically communicate how much you've got where. So in this example, we've only put one risk in each cell. You might have 10 risks in one cell and none in another. And when you do your project risk reviews, you can very quickly focus in on the things that actually make a difference, on the things that are worth managing. And just as an aside, if I zoom in a little bit, the way this is actually set up is this is making a severity calculation from information that we enter into the topic. And if we move it to a different cell, it makes a different severity calculation. So this is in the background, it's generating information from the impact and the likelihood, making a calculation of severity. So it's generating live information for us as well as we move things around. So this grid would be a great place to start with a risk review. On the right-hand side of the map, on the tree, we could actually have a detailed breakdown of what those risks are, of what the actions are, mitigating actions and corrective actions that we're taking. And this itself could be a little plan of how you're dealing with risk in a project. So we have a combination of a nice graphic on one side that's not just a static picture, it's actually a live thing that people can understand, and a breakdown of detail on the right-hand side of the map. Now, another format that we could use with tabular information is a RASI grid. RASI, I'm sure most people have come across this. It's responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. This shows you what the role is within the project of different either departments or individuals stakeholders in your project and the project activities. And again, we can use Mind Manager to quite quickly build up a grid. You can see at a glance who's doing what where. We can add keys to that, so you can have explanations of what the legends are. And again, you could hyperlink from one of these topics to a whole raft of other information or processes or procedures. So this isn't just a PowerPoint slide, it isn't just a snapshot, it isn't just a table in a printed document. This is a live thing that actually takes us through to related information. And out of a RASI grid will really flow your project procedures, the things that you must do to communicate your project and to keep people updated and engaged in the project. So this is using Mind Manager to draw RASI grid and using some of Mind Manager's features to make that more dynamic and more interactive. Bit of summary here. You could build a communications plan out of your RASI grid as well. So you can look at the communication needs in your project. Now, back to something we looked at the beginning. What we're doing here is different to, I was going to say just a schedule, but a schedule is a really important thing. It's a superset of other project management tools that you could use, and you can integrate lots of different types of information together. Now, it might seem like you're putting too much into one pot, by pouring it all into one diagram, but it's really important that people understand context and understand impact of what's happening, and visualizing that can add a lot of value to that. And in particular, you can keep track of a lot of detail in context. You don't have to see things in isolation. You can see where they belong, where they fit, and what else they relate to. So using a tool like Mind Manager to make a model of a project and everything around it, and the strategy around it, and all the other related information around it, it is an exercise in communication and in developing pictures and being able to communicate those and being able to see detail in context. So if we wrap this up, I haven't done any demo really of the Mind Manager software itself. I've just left you to wonder about all the other things that are in the menus here. Again, it's principally a graphical tool, but it's a very intelligent graphical tool. It's got a lot of capability behind it in understanding what it is that you put in there, and transforming it, doing analyses on it, exporting it, importing it. There's a huge amount of flow that you can take backwards and forwards between other applications of Mind Manager and use it as a communication tool as well. If you're working on small projects or in small teams, Mind Manager could deliver that project from beginning to end for you. It has enough capability in terms of project planning and keeping and scheduling, keeping track of everything. You could use that. Commonly, this will be used inside a consultancy house or by people who are not running large-scale projects with a prescribed tool set. If you're working in an organization that mandates, for example, the use of Microsoft Project for planning projects, Mind Manager still has a lot of value to add around that in terms of putting the project plan into context of a strategy, in terms of managing risk, modeling your risk, keeping track of your requirements, negotiating those requirements, using visual maps to negotiate with clients. So you could go along to the client with your map of what you believe their requirements are, and you'd have a very, very useful conversation by being able to visualize that. And using it to help with communication by producing diagrams that are meaningful, not generic. They're actually specific to your project. And you can use it to integrate processes and communication. We haven't talked about processes very much here. Mind Manager can also draw flowcharts. So if you wanted to draw process for how you deal with particular situations, you could put those into context to your project as well. But communications around your core plan are really where Mind Manager brings a lot of added value. And just to summarize, wrap up again, it's the process of drawing these things where the value comes from. You haven't finished when you've drawn a map. What you've really done is you've clarified how you think the world works, and that can change and needs to change and needs to be dynamic. So the value of using a tool like this is not in the beautiful pictures it produces, it's in the process that enables, because it's very ergonomic, and not many people want to take on a new piece of software, but out of all the pieces of software that you could learn, a tool like this would pay dividends once you're up to speed with it, because it can reflect the way you're thinking about something. Other people can understand that much more quickly, and that's got a very quick payback on that. And that's about me. How are we doing with questions, Sebastian?
Great. Well, thanks, Nick, for the presentation. Yeah, we already have a few questions in the question box. If there are some more, please send them through. I've got a first question here. Yeah, is it possible to export any information from Mine Manager into Microsoft Project?
Yes, you can do. You can, if you've made a work breakdown structure map, you can either send this to Mine Manager's built-in Gantt charting function, or you can do an export to Microsoft Project. Unfortunately, on this particular system, I haven't got Microsoft Project installed, but if you have Microsoft Project desktop edition installed, you can export straight to that, and the tasks and the descriptions, the times, the task owners, the dependencies, all of that stuff gets exported into Microsoft Project, and you can then continue from there. But be aware that that is a fork in your plan, that if you export to project, you can't change the map unless you're going to export it again. And if you change the project, it doesn't come back into the map again. So in that's the sort of situation where you'd use Mine Manager to get an outline plan, a basic concept plan in place, and then maybe continue to develop in Microsoft Project after that.
Thanks, Nick. The next question we have is, how do you collaborate in real time using Mine Manager?
Okay, what you can, there's a number of ways you can do that. There isn't at the moment an online version with the same power as Mine Manager Desktop. But what you can do is you can export maps to an HTML5 web page, and people can see those and interact with them. And there are other options for being able to update that. That's one way that you could do it. Another way is you could share maps on a shared drive. And if you have maps stored in a place where they can be accessed by multiple people on the web clients, you can also do co-editing at the same time. So a number of people can be in the same map editing at the same time. But that does require a web service to be able to do that. Have I missed anything there? You probably know that stuff better than me, Sebastian.
No, I think you covered it. Yeah. Next question we have is, would you use Mine Manager for an agile structured project?
Yes, it's very good for doing that. We looked at work breakdown structures, but there's a number of other features. We didn't do a complete walkthrough of all the Mine Manager features, but we have one of the things you can do if you have a map of information is create an index, and you can put markers or tags on topics. You can then view the map by columns as well. So if you create, and unfortunately I haven't got a demo right at my fingertips, but if you create a little, let's say either an Agile or a Kanban marking scheme, you can have columns that reflect your different stages that people can, activities can be in, like they can be in the project backlog, they can be committed to this sprint, they can be taken for working on, they can be in progress, they can be finished, they can be they can have some kind of problem that needs to be resolved. So you can very quickly move topics in between the columns and use a grid view like this in My Manager to create an agile or a Kanban dashboard where you can see what's being done by whom, what state it's at, and you can do your agile reviews, you can do your sprint demos by viewing a project map as a set of columns like this. I'd explain that really badly. I think we have got other webinars where we've gone through this in much more detail, but basically you can put anything you like into a map and you can view it in any number of ways. And instead of it being a tree, you could simply mark up different things and manage them by them being in different columns in a grid like this. And one of the ways to do that would be to do a model of Agile and have activities or tasks in different buckets at different times. So you could do your sprint planning, move all the topics into the one sprint column, and then say we'll work on that until we've finished that sprint or it runs out of time. So yes, Agile is a common way to see My Manager used.
Great. We've got a question regarding Primavera. I don't know if it's a tool you're familiar with, Nick. Is it possible to import or export data from Primavera?
I'm not 100% sure of that. It used to be, because there was MPX import and export, but I'm not sure whether the MPX import and export is still in the product these days. I don't think there's a native import and export to Primavera, but it used to be possible through MPX.
Okay. Well,
I'm sure that functionality is still around somewhere, even if it's not built into the product today.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we can check on that and get back to you on that one, Elvin, if you would like. And Brian Moore is actually asking the same question. Okay. Going back to sort of collaboration, can the My Manager map be edited by more than one user at the same time?
Yes, there is a collaborative editing mode where you all need to be able to access the map in the same location. One person publishes that to the server, and then other people can join a collaborative editing session, and you can see who's where, what they've got selected. There's a little label that pops up to say John is looking at this part of the map, and you can see edits as they take place at the same time. So yes is the answer.
Correct. Are there any good tutorials to learn the software? I would say a couple of things. So within the software, there's some onboarding tutorials that are quite detailed that can help you with learning the software. There's also lots of different map templates that are available in the software and which are quite handy because it's a good place to start with a model, with a template. Nick is actually showing the templates as we speak. And in addition to those templates, and you see Nick is showing you some on project management, but in addition to the templates and the tutorials within the software, we've got quite a few tutorials on our YouTube channel, and we do regularly some webinars on some of our features. So if you look at our website on mindmanager.com, there's a whole series of webinars on different features and different use cases. So plenty of resources to learn the software.
And there's also the community online as well on the My Manager website. People often post questions there and they're answered by community members rather than official support.
Yep, correct. And I think that's it. Sorry, I'm just looking through the questions. Would you use any of these tools for a workshop? I guess the question here is to present or to present a workshop or present a session. That's how I understand the question.
Okay, well, probably a couple of options again. One of the features of Mind Manager is there's no one answer to any question. There's always 3 or 4 answers to everything. Yes, workshops are, and brainstorming are where mind mapping really grew out of. There are a number of well-established methods for using it in a brainstorming environment. There are a lot of well-documented advantages for drawing things in maps rather than on lists. And brainstorming mode used to be quite a big thing in Mind Manager and in mind mapping software in general. The reason is that you can go from a rough set of ideas, unrelated ideas, to a developed structure within the same environment, within the same workspace. And now you can go from an empty screen with just a couple of ideas right the way through to a project schedule without leaving that workspace. So yes, supporting workshops is a very important part of creating collaborative understanding, really, so that people can see where what they've suggested or proposed fits in everywhere else. Another answer to that question would be, yes, you can use Mind Manager to make presentations. So I've done it in this webinar. We've just presented straight out of the product. So you can see the space that I'm working in, see the tool that I'm using. But you can turn a map into PowerPoint slides. You can turn it into built-in slides. You can mark up a topic as a slide, and it will create a much more polished, seamless walkthrough. If you want to make a presentation of something important in a structured way, you can develop that out of a map and turn that into slides that can be shared, and you could use in something that people wouldn't be alarmed. They're seeing some piece of software they've never seen before. All they'd be seeing is informational slides, and you're not distracting them with the tool. Unfortunately, I chose to distract you with the tool today, but we could have turned this into slides, and it just would have been a slide at a time. So that, yes, hopefully one of those answers is the answer that was needed there.
Great, thank you. Next question so it's from someone working for a large organization. Can we share the map with team members but lock certain areas that they couldn't touch or edit?
Yes, there is a contributor mode. So if you wanted to collaborate with other people on a map, you can restrict what they're able to do. You can configure the contributor mode and prevent them from modifying certain aspects of the map itself. Or if you want to share a map without them being able to modify it, you could publish it as an HTML5 map and put it on the intranet in your organization. And they'd have a pretty similar experience in terms of navigating the map, expanding and collapsing topics and drilling down, reading notes, everything else, except they wouldn't be editing the map in the desktop application here. So the HTML5 export is a good way to go for communication inside organizations.
So another question here of someone who creates BIM models and then link scheduling, costs, risk, dimensions to the model. Is there any capability of Mind Manager to do this?
Yes, almost certainly. It's got a lot of built-in features, which again we didn't cover. It's got the ability to do calculations and formulas. You can add custom properties to the map, so you can have custom cost properties added to topics, and you can make calculations on that. And if that's not enough, it's also got a macro feature where either somebody with some knowledge of VBA compatible macro scripting or they can get somebody to help them, you could create a custom solution to do anything that you really needed to. So if you needed to do a much deeper level of analysis and manipulation on the data in the map and produce reports out of it, then it has the ability to extend to that.
Okay. So a question here from a Mind Manager user who finds it really useful to use Mind Manager to sort stuff out. But he's saying the trouble comes when sharing or jointly working with others. How do we manage to bridge this problem when you have Mind Manager?
Yeah, this is, I feel your pain. This is one of the reasons behind trying to make complex things more accessible to other people by not just showing people a very large scale detailed map. Now, when you start to use Mind Manager to break down ideas and collect information, maps grow really big really quickly, and that's it's a big benefit for the people who are creating the map. It's a big disbenefit for people who aren't, because all people see, if you show them a complicated map, is a huge amount of detail. They feel, I don't need to know that detail, that's too much. And I would suggest if you've got complicated things and complex things that you want to communicate, then certainly don't try to get people to engage with a tree with 1,000 topics in it and 100 headings, because they will lose the will to live very fast. If you can, try and present it in some kind of smaller graphic that helps them get oriented. And with the newer versions of Mind Manager, you can now draw lots of different types of diagram on the left-hand side of your map here, and help them to focus on that aspect of it, on the helicopter view, before they understand the detail. It always was an issue with Mind Manager maps and mind mapping software maps in general, that you could very easily have information overload, that people would have what was termed map shock. You'd show them a map that you're proud as anything, that you spend a week working on it, it's got everything in it, it's just the best map ever, and somebody else looks at it and they just look at it, and then they look at you, and then they look at the map again, and you know they're not going to get it. So with the newer features of Mind Manager, the ability to draw different types of more compact diagram, I would say take advantage of those, use those to try and communicate the big concept more clearly to begin with, before you try and get people to engage with the detail. But yes, that's always been an issue, and it's a kind of reflection on how Mind Manager helps people to get a lot of detail out of their heads and onto paper and organized. That just grows and grows, that stuff. Maps never get smaller, they never get bigger.
Great, thanks, Nick. We've still got lots of questions actually, so I don't know if we'll have a chance to answer all of them. So, but we'll try and answer as much as we can. Someone has a strict MS Office 365 environment policy in their organization. Is Visio a good option for visualization?
Well, you can do a lot of the diagrams we've talked about in Visio. You probably have to work harder to make them animated, to actually turn them into real plans, but Visio can, on the face of it, draw many of the same types of diagram. And if you're prevented from using a sort of outlaw application like Mind Manager, and you have to use Visio, then I would say think about using the tools that we've talked about today. You know, the trees and the network diagrams and the tables and grids to draw these kind of artifacts for a project to communicate a project, and there are templates for all of these things in Visio, so it won't be difficult to do that. You won't have the interchangeability, like flipping between a tree and a Gantt chart that you've got in Mind Manager, but certainly being able to show people a diagram that they understand the purpose of and understand the format of very quickly is an invaluable part of using any visualization software.
Great. So we've got a question here on the network diagram that you showed, the triangle with the risks, cost, and quality.
Yep.
How graphically does this reflect true inputs to any changes to any of the free constraints, and how do you set up or model those inputs?
Okay, well, it's really just it's got a little bit of animation to it. What I've done for the purposes of this diagram was to write a rule for topics, that if the topic was above or below the budget constraint line, then it would be colored red with an X or green with a check mark. So that's just a little animation. To make that into a real reflection of the status of the map, what you could do is on the right hand side of your map in the tree part, you could have let's say a tree of requirements. You could define the status or a score for those requirements. You could use the formulas formulas feature to add those up and to transfer a value to a topic in a diagram, in a network diagram on the left, and then use that value to animate the visual status of it. So make it red, green, or amber. So you could actually turn that into a dashboard. I haven't done that in this demo, but the capability is there. What it needs is the ability to define how you're going to measure the status of these things, how you're going to analyze it, add them up, compare them to reference levels, whatever it is that you need to do. And Mind Manager's got all the abilities to be able to do that in terms of formulas that you can define to do numerical stuff, and smart rules that you can define that change the visualization of the map depending on the data that's behind it. So you can wire all that up. So there's not much animation in this diagram. The original intent of this was to communicate the idea of a complex system around change, and to communicate the need for some kind of process for dealing with change and what that process might be. To actually make that live, you would need to do more related to detail of your actual project. You'd need to do a little bit more configuration and breakdown of the different aspects. But yes, you could do quite a lot of that to make it into a live dashboard. So again, with risk, you could do the same thing with risk. If you're well enough organized, you have things specified in the same way, you have formulas that manipulate that and make some calculations, then this becomes a live dashboard. You can look at it and say, risk is in red status today, what are we going to do about it?
Okay, and then we've got a really good question here about using Mind Manager retrospectively, so using it as a tool for lessons learned after a project. Is there a scope to use the application in this way?
Absolutely, although I'm not a big fan of lessons learned. Not to say that you can't learn things, but retrospective analysis of a project. And often I've seen it in so many places where something goes wrong, they do a project retrospective or post-mortem or whatever it is, and they say, oh, we won't do it that way again, and then they forget, and then their optimism kicks in and they do it just the same way yet again. I would say start writing your lessons learned from day one of the project. Build a map about how things went wrong, because you need to be thinking about how you're going to prevent them from going wrong from day one, not after the project's ended. So yes, My Manager has been very frequently used as a project post-mortem tool. It's been used to conduct either post-project or post-employment interviews, trying to get a brain dump out of an individual or team. But turning those into lessons that you can bring to the next project is where the gap is. I'd say work on that from the beginning of the project rather than the end of the project. Think about your processes, think about your risk and how you manage risk and how things can go wrong, and try and anticipate that. So ideally, your project plan, or if you have a map about a project, that should already be your explanation for the project post-mortem. The project is what it is. It doesn't change to being a disaster on the last day. It was always headed that way right from the beginning, and you should be able to see that. So yes is the short answer to the question, but I would say don't wait until the project's ended before starting to use a tool like this to do a project post-mortem. Plan for that post-mortem from the first day.
Thanks, Nick. And maybe just one or two more questions, because I think we're reaching the end of the session. Can you collate all information of projects to a program view?
To some extent, yes. Mostly speaking, most of the features in My Manager work within the document that you're working on. But there is, I haven't got time to demo it now, but there is a map roll-up feature where you can effectively do a live export of information at the central topic of the map into another map. So you can create a map of maps dashboard, and you can roll up selected information like task information and other properties, and view all of those together in a high-level map. So you can roll them up, yes.
Great. Okay. There's a few more questions around Primavera, so we'll make sure to look this up and answer to you on this point. There's a question here. How long does it take to learn and use the software for an average sized project?
That's a good question and a really difficult one. It's to get value out of having the software, a couple of hours. If you're able to start organizing your information, collecting ideas and getting them structured, that is already delivering value. To use it for to make a project schedule, probably, again, you could get somewhere in a few hours, but you'll find more and more features the more you use it. There's a lot of depth of features that the developers work quite hard to try to make it relatively easy to use, but with a lot of depth behind it that you can go further. So I would say the way to learn it is by using it, not by reading about it and then going straight into a large project. I would start with something small and keep on adding some new function each day, to have an ambition to say, today I'll extend my tool set by just a small amount by trying something different or adding a little bit. But you could start getting value from it pretty quickly out of after installing it.
Yeah, I agree. It's quite.
You can't say 3 weeks. It's not like that. It's a very deep product. It's simple on the surface, but there's a lot of depth behind it.
Indeed, there is. Yeah. Okay. Someone's asking, do you have a version that we can try before buying? Yes, of course. If you go onto our website, mindmanager.com, there's a free 30-day trial which offers you, the full. It's a full feature trial, so you can try out all the features. And yeah, there's quite a few more questions, but I'm afraid I don't know if we'll have time to go through them all.
No, we're approaching our time now. We've got time for one more question.
One more question. Great.
One more.
So, assuming a project model and timeline is developed, how does the impact of any single change or modification impact the whole model across the visualizations previously set up for a Mind Manager project?
Well, to do that, you would have to keep your maps up to date as the project changed. So if you're in an environment where you're using other tools to deliver the project, then the maps may be, they might not be up to date to an extent. But if you're continuing to use, for example, if I go back to the map view here, if you're continuing to use, say, the Gantt chart for a project, you could update the topics in the map, the tasks in the map as the project progresses, and it will replan as you go. So you'll be able to see what the impact of a change in situation or circumstance has been, or delivery has been, on the actual end date of your project or milestones in your project. So you could use this to keep track of milestones. So if you keep the project up to date, keep the maps up to date, then the information retains its integrity. It will either replan or recalculate costs or recalculate risks if you have those features set up into your project model. So yes, it's a dashboard rather than just a snapshot, a static view, if you keep the maps up to date. Do you think that answers the question, or have I missed the point?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, with that in mind, it brings us to the end of our webinar. It's lovely to see how many questions this webinar has prompted. So I'll make sure both Nick and Sebastian receive them so they can follow those up. A big thank you to both Nick and Sebastian for their times today, sharing their knowledge with us. Thank you to all our attendees for joining. It's been a very engaging session.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.